Hello, and welcome to this episode of Security Square, our cybersecurity focused series featuring analyst insights, expert guests, and the latest news and happenings across the security sector. I'm your host, Shelly Kramer, principal analyst here at Kramer Co Research. Today, I'm joined by Brett Stone Gross, Senior Director of Threat Intelligence at Zscaler, for a conversation and a walkthrough of the newly released Zscaler Threat Labs 2024 Ransomware Report, which is out just in time for Black Hat, which is being held in Las Vegas this week. Brett, welcome.
Thank you, Shelly.
So glad to have you and very much looking forward to this conversation. So, being the geek that I am, of course, I've spent the last few hours this afternoon digging into the report. And I'll admit, there was not really anything unexpected. Your data aligns exactly with what we've seen in our own research. And that is that ransomware is hot, 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 right? And the Zscaler Threat Labs report shows that data leak sites affirm that ransomware remains incredibly popular among cyber threat actors, and with good reason. It's really profitable. In fact, your report mentioned that Threat Labs tracked an 18% in ransomware attacks year over year. So I'm going to start with my most pressing question. Your report showed a ransomware payment, a big one, in the amount of $75 million in US dollars made to the Dark Angels ransomware group. That is nearly double the highest publicly known ransomware payout. What does this mean? Why should we be concerned about this?
Yeah, that's right. It was one of the things that we tracked over last year that was also very surprising to us. And it's showing a trend where these attacks are becoming more damaging, both in terms of the cost associated with it, and also the data that is stolen, the volume of data that is being stolen by these groups. And with this particular group, they've been doing things quite different than other ransomware groups. And that's what really makes this story interesting. Yeah. With typical ransomware groups, they want to cause a business disruption, and their goal is to pressure you with this business disruption to pay a ransom. Right. Dark Angels actually operates in the opposite direction. They actually don't want to cause your business a disruption. They want to steal a vast amount of data that they can then hold as ransom. So they're stealing data kind of on another order of magnitude for most groups. So we saw, and we described in the report, some of the companies they stole data from was between 10 and 100 terabytes of data. So you're now talking about, like significant amounts of customer information, your employee data, your client records. And this can be, very, very consequential to a business. And when you look at, some of these companies, this specific company that paid a $75 million ransom is a Fortune 50 company. So to them, obviously, they did, some math and decided it was worth paying a ransom than risk that amount of data being leaked online.
Right. That is a lot of data, and it's a lot of money. But, we all know that, or certainly those of in this industry know that data is the lifeblood of every business today. And you can do a lot when you get your hands on X number of terabytes of data and do a lot of damage.
That's right. Yeah. So AI is obviously, one of the main use cases for collecting a lot of data. Right. So more and more companies are collecting more and more data, and that will become more likely to be targeted by these groups that will steal that data, and they can leverage that to either demand a ransom or leak that information. So It becomes more and more difficult for consumers like me and you to keep our data safe because that data is exposed by so many companies, and even large companies we're seeing fall vulnerable to these attacks. And the other thing that we wanted to call out was with Dark Angels, they actually don't want to be in the headlines. So a lot of these ransomware groups, you might have seen with other, like there was a company made software for car dealerships, and that caused a massive disruption that lasted weeks. And that was all over the news. And there was other cases, lots of other ransomware cases where there's these major business disruptions. And what we're seeing with Dark Angels is they haven't really been in the headlines almost at all. And they do that on purpose, because they don't want to be in the news. They get a lot less scrutiny from researchers, a lot less scrutiny, more importantly, from law enforcement. So it kind of reduces their risk of ever facing any kind of prosecution, but at the same time, they're actually more successful than nearly any other group, if not the most successful group. And for that reason, we ranked them #1 in our ransomware report this year.
Well, I think that, it's funny because there is the hubris that's involved when you pull off something of great magnitude and you want to beat your chest and tell the world. But the reality of it is operating in stealth mode is a lot smarter. I
It
mean,
is.
that's a
Absolutely.
no-brainer. And so resisting the urge to, you know, sort of sing the praises of your dirty deeds seems like a smart business tactic.
Yeah.
I noticed when I looked at the report, the alluring industry targets include really the old favorites: manufacturing, healthcare, technology. Manufacturing, not surprisingly, accounted for more than double the attacks of any other industry. I'm going to lob you a softball question here. Why are these sectors so highly prized and targeted by cyber criminals?
Yeah, so there's a number of reasons why, and some of those reasons is they may not take security as maybe seriously as other industries, but I think more importantly, and probably one of the biggest contributing factors is that a lot of them can't have outages and downtime. So if you're in a hospital, you can't have your critical patients be hooked up to a machine that might crash.
Right.
So deploying new technologies, whether it be any kind of new software or software update, as we saw recently, those are risky. So if you need to migrate to kind of a new security stack, and you might require downtime and outages, and kind of obviously a major investment, a lot of them are slower to move to the newer technologies that would keep them safer or reduce the risk associated with these attacks. So outages are really, and business continuity is a really important factor, where some of these industries, they just, they have to take things slowly because they can't, have the risk of, their industrial, manufacturing plant down for, several days or a week or whatever that time period is. And similarly with healthcare and other industries.
Yeah, and I think another factor here is the many, many, many endpoints and the vulnerabilities that come along with having lots of endpoints, things that are connected to the internet, all of the things, think about a manufacturing facility, or think about a hospital or a healthcare clinic setting or whatever. And you think about all of the machines and all of the things that they do. Well, they're connected to the internet. And so that's an endpoint there. And I think another thing that plays a role here, I was having a discussion with a colleague about this recently. And, another thing that plays a role here is that, take healthcare, for instance. I think some things that are connected to the internet maybe weren't always intended to be connected in the way that we're using them. And so, like you mentioned, sometimes these organizations aren't as up to date as they need to be. Sometimes there's a lack of skilled talent. Sometimes they're trying to go it on their own rather than working with a trusted vendor partner. So many things play a role here, but a lot of this really comes down to endpoints, and they're attractive to threat actors.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The year-over-year trends that you earmarked in the report were also of interest. I saw the energy sector experienced a 527.27% increase in ransomware extortion attacks. That doesn't surprise me. Critical infrastructure, I understand the allure there. And to your point about, critical infrastructure, you can't shut this down. We serve too many people and too many vital things. I also noticed restaurants, bars, and food services organizations experienced a 333% increase in attacks. And so I want to talk about that a little bit. And I also noticed that religious organizations experienced a 250% increase. So as I said, I understand the energy sector, critical infrastructure, restaurants, bars, food services. I understand that increase with the digitization that we see happening across the board in those establishments. And when you think about, them shifting to digital payments, other digital methods of interacting with customers, say QR codes that COVID kind of reintroduced to all of us, right? So I see that, and that the increase there makes sense. But what about religious organizations? I couldn't draw an immediate line to why they would be an attractive target for threat actors.
Yeah, so some of this is speculation, but I think it's probably, like those organizations may not have the security solutions in place. And, a lot of ransomware attacks are opportunistic. So like, if you have a system exposed to the internet, maybe they don't have a strong password, it's easily guessed, or maybe they don't patch vulnerable software quick enough. So we see a lot of things, between brute force, password guessing attacks, to these vulnerabilities, or it could be spam email. Maybe some religious organizations don't train their employees for proper cybersecurity hygiene. So there's obviously a number of reasons that they could fall victim to these attacks, but at this point, it's your guess is probably as good as mine.
Well, and as you were talking about it, I obviously wasn't paying any attention because I was thinking about, it kind of occurred to me, I'm teasing, by the way, it kind of occurred to me that, when you think about donations that people make to religious organizations, they make those online these days.
Yep.
And so, I mean, just sign up, monthly tithing or whatever it is you want to call it, and good Catholic girl here. So that sort of makes sense too, because of course the bigger the church, the bigger repository of PII that you might be able to get access to. So that kind of occurred to me that could be one of the things that makes them attractive. And to your point too, I mean, I would not imagine that most religious organizations have the most highly skilled IT talent. It just makes perfect sense. So that'll be interesting to watch. It'll be interesting to watch,
Absolutely.
next year and see what happens there, and to kind of see. We're just speculating here, but that'll be interesting. So, one of the things I learned from your report is that when it comes to ransomware, geography matters. Let's talk about that a little bit. I know your report showed that the U.S. experienced 101, almost 102% year-over-year increase in ransomware attacks. Sweden saw a 350% rise. The UK, Germany, Canada, France, Italy, Mexico, Spain, they all had significant increases in attacks. Why is it important for those of us in the cybersecurity field to understand the distribution, the geographical distribution of ransomware attacks?
Yeah, so it comes down to risk. If you're in certain regions, you're definitely at higher risk of these attacks. There's various reasons why certain geographic regions are more impacted or targeted than others. The United States, surprisingly, accounted for nearly 50% of the attacks, and that kind of shocked us a bit. The United States has always been kind of at the top of the list, but now accounting for about half the attacks is something that's really interesting. What we believe that the reason is that there's lots and lots of businesses in the U.S. And so essentially the criminals go where the money's at. So a lot of small medium businesses, they fall victim to these attacks because they just don't have the necessary security solutions in place to prevent a lot of these attacks. And in some of these other regions, it could be like also due to opportunistic attacks, and like some of these countries, they're bringing more and more businesses online, which makes them also more vulnerable to ransomware attacks. And in terms of English-speaking countries, that's been the way, in terms of cybercrime focusing on English-speaking countries. That's been going on for the better part of a decade. And before ransomware, one of the things that we tracked for a long time, we've been doing this for quite some time. That was a lot of these groups that are doing ransomware used to be doing wire fraud and banking fraud. So back then they would steal your credentials, they do a fraudulent wire transfer or ACH transfer. And they all pivoted to ransomware because it was far easier to profit and also to monetize. So, with ransomware, everything's usually with cryptocurrency, usually Bitcoin in particular. And, the old days where they did wire fraud, it was a complex system where they had to have money mules to, transfer money, from the stolen account or from the compromised account
Right.
to their account, and then maybe to, several other middlemen. Everyone takes, a cut in between, where the criminals, get the money and from the victim bank account. So this is far more lucrative and far less complex to monetize than the previous, wire fraud that we saw for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, if it's easier, that makes sense. If it's more lucrative,
Exactly.
faster,
Easier and more
right?
profitable.
It makes perfect sense. I mean, really, this is when I talk about this, and we talk about the advent of AI and generative AI and how that's being used and will be used. I mean, this is all about threat actors are incredibly motivated by financial gain. I mean, this is not rocket science, right? It
Yeah.
makes sense. They go after the most lucrative targets. And I do think some of this, and wonder what you think, the geography question is, the more affluent nations logically make sense to target, right?
Yeah. So in
Yeah.
terms of the number of infections, that varies, but the actual attacks that are going after the largest companies are generally where the money is for them.
Yeah.
So they're constantly innovating. We know that they learn. I mean, they're very smart people, and they run a lot of these businesses, and they have teams that are responsible for doing different things. And at the end of the day, you would think after a group has received a $75 million payment, they might at some point say, I have all the money I ever need to live. I can
No.
retire. But they don't.
No, I mean, and part of it too, though, is, some of this is kind of gamified. I mean, in the biggest sense of the word, right? It's like, can I do this? Can I make it happen? Holy cow, look you know what I'm saying? And it's like, so you sort of get that rush and that high. Why don't you want to keep? I mean, I can totally see why people wouldn't say, oh, I've got all the money I need. Let's just stop and
Yeah,
go.
and we've seen that progressive trend where payments and ransom demands are going up and up and up.
Yeah.
So if they got 75 million this time, I'm guessing they probably want to make 150 million the next
right.
time.
Why wouldn't you? So let's see. The Threat Labs report indicated there's an almost 18% increase in ransomware attacks based on what you've seen, blocked attempts across the Zscaler cloud. What does that tell us about what we may need to do more of, do differently, or focus on when it comes to combating cyber attacks?
Yeah. So first, in terms of the number itself, 18% is actually lower than the previous years in terms of growth.
Okay.
So that's a good thing. The bad thing is the payments are going up. And so you have kind of this dynamic, and we think it might be somewhat maybe even started by this Dark Angels group, where there's going to be maybe less attacks, but they're going to be much more targeted attacks, less opportunistic, less smaller demands, and more targeted, going after very large companies, for extremely large payments, where we see tens of millions. And I do think we will see, probably, soon, a company that pays over $100 million.
Yeah.
So in terms of the growth of attacks, it's slowing, which is a good thing, but the payments are going up, which is a bad thing.
Right.
And then in terms of what companies can do, obviously there's a lot of technologies, including something that Zscaler offers. There's a lot of things in terms of having your data stolen that you can leverage to make sure you capture or identify an attack before it's too late, before tens of terabytes of data are stolen. When we talk about tens of terabytes of data stolen from these large companies, we're not talking about a matter of hours. We're not talking about a matter of days. We're talking about a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of opportunities where companies can do better, can deploy better solutions, better monitoring. And also, it's important for companies that already have these solutions to actually make sure they're actively monitoring these solutions.
Yeah.
And what we see sometimes is alert overload. There's companies that have various solutions, and they're constantly seeing like, thousands or tens of thousands of alerts a day, and then they start ignoring it. So then when there is a true positive, they might totally miss it. And then obviously at that point, it's too late.
Yeah, I see that. You know what? I have alert overload. 10 minutes before we hopped on this recording, I was opening the mail and I have a letter from Ticketmaster telling me about their data breach and what I need to do. You know what I'm saying? Like, so when you think about that as a consumer and and of course, that's not the only breach alert that I have gotten or will get. But when you think about, I think about I didn't go, oh my gosh, and rush to, you know what I'm saying? Like sometimes it is a sense of overload. So I can only imagine what it would be like to be an IT pro and to be dealing with these massive amounts of alerts and things like that. It would be easy to be overwhelmed. It really would be,
Yeah. And there's solutions that actually are designed to, minimize, like all those alerts that, a normal SOC team, security operations center team might see. And, there's a lot of money being poured into AI to solve some of those solutions. So, AI, can maybe assist with reducing, all those, the noise and try to give you, only things that require your attention. And obviously there's a lot of, work being done on optimizations. If you right now need 1,000 people, maybe you can do it, more efficiently. But we'll see if AI holds the solution for, I guess, a lot of these problems.
It's interesting. I did a research study a couple of years ago. It's probably been, I don't know, 4 years ago, maybe. And one of the things that we were asking survey respondents was, about visibility and to use, and really we started asking, have you experienced a cyber attack? And do you expect to experience a cyber attack, in the next 3 months, 6 months, whatever. And another question that we asked was, do you use some kind of a dashboard that allows visibility across your IT landscape? And it was very interesting and really not surprising that the people who had visibility knew they were experiencing cyber attacks on a regular basis. And they knew that that was not going to change, that volume was going to continue. They were watching it every day. And the people who didn't use any kind of dashboard, not only did they think they weren't experiencing any attacks, they didn't expect to experience any attacks. And I'm just reading those data points once we got the survey results back and thinking, okay, well, you're going to be a victim and you're going to be a victim. You know what I'm saying? Like, people sometimes don't understand the importance of having visibility into your systems and the continuous monitoring. Technology is your friend when it comes to cybersecurity. It really is. And you can't combat what you can't see.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, a lot of these, security solutions, like there might be, one vendor that sells, like an endpoint, one vendor that is you leverage for network monitoring, and another vendor you use for, DLP and so on. And, there's been also a lot of work in the area of, like you said, having these dashboards where it integrates all these various, products. So you can see the whole picture because, one solution might only give you part of the picture, and it's important, obviously, to see the bigger picture. So you're absolutely right in terms of these companies. Like, if you don't know what's happening, it's probably too late. And
Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. All these companies really need to spend the investment, whether they're big or small. And one of the things we also expect to see over the next few years or so is these very targeted attacks like Dark Angels, where they're not going after the masses. They're going after the biggest of the big, and they want to make as much money as possible. And it's going to require a lot of effort to make sure that they're not successful. And one of the things that we called out in the ransomware report that's also kind of an area of focus that we're monitoring is voice-based attacks. So they'll call your IT department or your help desk and say, hey, I'm locked out of my computer. Can you give me access? And some of these are done by English-speaking attackers, And so you might not hear or might not expect, some of them to be obviously malicious.
Yeah.
And we've seen, like casinos, fall victim to these attacks. We're also seeing companies right now being targeted by a different group where they're actually sending spam to people just at this company. They're doing it much more selectively. It's not spamming kind of, like millions of email addresses. They're spamming individual companies. Then they're using things like LinkedIn and Zoom Info to identify people who work at those companies.
Oh, yeah.
They're calling them on the phone and they're saying, hey, we're from your help desk. We're here to help solve your spam problem. And people are giving them access to their systems.
Yeah.
And from there, they're able to compromise their systems. And that ends up being kind of an initial area where they're able to then access that corporate network and move laterally and then compromise the entire network.
People are our greatest asset and our weakest link when it comes to cybersecurity. And it's an innocent thing. You know what I'm saying? I mean, if you got a call from a help desk, and you work for a medium-sized company, of course you're going to help. You know what I'm saying? So it's not really out of the realm of the normal that somebody would fall for something like that. That's a hard one to combat.
Yeah, and we think it's going to become even harder because technology like voice cloning and deepfakes is getting better and better.
Yeah.
We have actually seen our own CEO, someone was used voice cloning for his voice and attempted to deceive one of our employees. And then there was actually an article written recently where the CEO of Ferrari, there was a person impersonating him, and that person kind of got a little suspicious based on what they were asking and asked him, hey, we were talking about a book recently.
What was it?
Can you tell me what it was? And that person didn't know, obviously didn't have that level of information because they were a scammer and they hung up. So there are things you could do potentially to protect yourself against those attacks. One being obviously if you have personal information or you had a conversation with somebody. The other thing you can do is you can hang up and call that person back because a lot of times they use like caller ID spoofing. So there are defenses, but these types of attacks, if you have a believable voice at the other end, maybe you think it's your boss or maybe you think it's the CEO, people generally are more trusting by voice than over email or text.
Absolutely. Well, and CEO phishing and vishing and smishing, that's not new. I mean, haven't we all gotten, a text from purportedly your CEO asking you, hey, I'm stuck in a meeting. I really need some Visa gift cards. Can you run out? You know what I'm saying? Like all of that, whether it's email, whether it's text message. So it only makes sense that, the next frontier for that is voice. But it is I talk about this with my colleagues all the time because here I am, a public figure. I'm on video everywhere, all over the internet, cloning my voice would not be at all difficult. I mean, I've talked to my kids, my husband, my 87-year-old mother-in-law about, not trusting, you get a phone call from somebody, it's that they say it's me or one of the girls, you know what I'm saying? Like, trust but verify, or have a safe word, or don't be afraid to, say that's a smart, your suggestion of, hey, I've got to hang up. Let me call you back in just a second, and that sort of thing. So those are good tactics. But I think that this voice business is something that is not widely known. So this is really something that I think we need to add to the conversations that we have internally throughout the organization about the fact that it's happening and giving people thoughts on what to do there, because this is kind of an unknown. I do want to touch on, I want to give you a shout out here to, I love, you guys launched a mobile app here at that I saw at Zenith Live, which I love because, the whole, I love, well, I think often about the heavy load that CISOs and security pros carry around all day, every day, and truly how they sleep sometimes, I'm not sure. But what I love about your app is that, you can roll over before you get out of bed and open the app and see what's happening across the system and just have an instant bird's eye view. And another thing I think that the app does is, kind of brings you news of the day, like what's happening across the cybersecurity landscape. And so, not that you have to check it before you get out of bed. I'm sort of just nerdy enough that I probably would do that. But I think having that kind of information at your fingertips is really a valuable tool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the whole new regulatory landscape and disclosure trends. So we've got some relatively new SEC regulations. They mandate the timely reporting of material cybersecurity incidents and require the submission of detailed information about a company's cybersecurity risk management and governance, and that's all a good thing. But one of the things I noted that was mentioned in the Threat Labs report, Brett, is that some companies, in some instances, pretty big, fairly well-known companies, are failing to comply with these rules. And I think this is a challenge, and you and I chatted about this a little bit before we hopped on, but the EU's regulations as it relates to data privacy and security and AI are much meatier than what we have here in the United States. So what do you see? And I will say it concerns me that we've got these regulations. They're designed to protect and really built around being transparent about security incidents and the risk factors and that sort of thing. But what do you see ahead as it relates to non-compliance? Do you think that does the government today have any teeth to force compliance?
So they definitely have teeth, but I think the question is, like, there will be probably a progressive system where more rules are put in place that will actually define what it means to be material and what what exactly needs to be reported. Because this is essentially the first time the government has required publicly traded companies to disclose a cybersecurity incident.
Right.
Before that, there was many companies that we saw that they paid many significant ransoms, and they were never in the news, and no one would ever know.
And they were happy about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things actually we wrote about in the last year's ransomware report was, what impact will this have? Will it reduce the ransoms? Will people pay less ransoms because now they have to legally disclose it? And the short answer is we definitely haven't seen the actual payments decline at all. And in fact, it's the opposite. What we have seen is more disclosures, but the transparency of the disclosures, I think, needs to be better, in my opinion.
Yeah.
A lot of times you'll see very vague descriptions about there was a cybersecurity incident, but they don't provide any details. They don't provide, like, details if they paid a ransom. They don't tell you how much they paid if they paid. They don't tell you really anything other than a dollar amount, if that was caused by an incident. And there's a lot I think that should be done to protect the customers, the clients, and the employees of these companies, to make sure that when there are these incidents, that they're transparent. And I think the shareholders have a right to know, and everybody who that data was stolen from has a right to know. So I think the SEC will probably take more aggressive actions, especially for those who are non-compliant. I think they purposely wrote it in a way that could be interpreted different ways. But I do think we will see at some point the SEC probably sue some of these companies and charge them with violating these new rules. And after that, that may also set some precedents for companies to be more forthcoming.
Well, the reality of it is that it is perfectly understandable why companies would be reluctant to report, right? I mean, this is kind of like your driver's license. Like, it's a known fact that everybody lies about their height and their weight on their driver's license, right? Well, you shouldn't be able to not disclose, and you shouldn't be able to, or if you do disclose, understating the realities of the situation. I would expect companies would do that, just like I expect people to lie on their driver's licenses.
They do.
Right? You know what I'm talking about. You're really 6'5". But anyway, I just think that we need to get to a point where that transparency can be trusted, and so it'll be interesting to watch and see how regulations evolve and policies and that sort of thing. And obviously ransomware isn't going away. So it'll be interesting to watch this.
Yeah, and most of those disclosures, like you said, are underreported, and
Absolutely.
they're they definitely, most of them try to diminish the
Yeah.
actual attack itself and what was lost.
Which is understandable. But the reality of it is, as you said, it's stakeholders and shareholders and employees and their families, and it is customers. And, I mean, our data, when you think about some of the biggest breaches out there, it's employees and consumers who bear the burden,
Yeah.
really. And so expecting greater transparency and truthfulness should not be too big of an ask, in my opinion. We'll see, Brett. We'll see if that happens.
Yeah.
All right. Well, in closing, it's clear that ransomware remains one of the most attractive tools in a cyber criminal's toolkit. There's every reason to expect that to continue. But that's really why zero trust security and prioritizing robust layered defenses, engaging, as I was mentioning earlier, in continuous monitoring. You can't combat what you can't see. And paid incident response capabilities. All of these things are business mission critical. And it's so clear that the ransomware threat will continue to evolve and present new challenges. Threat actors are going to get better at targeting, like you mentioned, finding those high value targets. And this is, you were talking about this, and I'm going back to the gamification thing. And this is like, Call of Duty. I'm not a gamer, so I think I've got the name right. Call of Duty or whatever. You get the adrenaline rush when you get to the next level, or you accomplish this or whatever. And some of this is, they're kind of beating themselves, and I got 75 million this time. Let me get 150 million next time. And, I mean, that's how their brains are wired, and that's understandable. So, and they're going to get better. And they're also going to get better at leveraging AI to help them be better, and to help those, who are not English as a first language speakers, to write better copy, or to, use voice activated things. And so it's really going to be interesting to watch this evolve. But I'm going to ask you one last question, Brett. What advice do you have for CISOs and their teams based on the ransomware data that you are seeing? What's your best advice that you want to leave them with?
So the best advice is actually, I would say, quite simple advice, and that is, there's a number of basic hygiene, IT hygiene, measures that most companies can take, and that will reduce the risk significantly by just taking basic measures. And some of those are well known, things like two-factor authentication. Believe it or not, a lot of attacks, the Snowflake attack that you mentioned with Ticketmaster, a lot of these companies were using two-factor authentication.
Yeah.
Things like making sure you actually leverage the security solutions you have. So if you're getting kind of this alert overload, either finding a solution that narrows down those alerts to something more manageable, where you can identify those. Network monitoring is incredibly important. Like we see terabytes of data being stolen over days and weeks. That's something that you would hope like a company should be able to catch. Having an endpoint where you can kind of see what's going on, and making sure if there's any threats, you can remediate those quickly, and preventing these attacks from moving on further. And then we mentioned zero trust. It's something that we offer. It's also incredibly important because you have to really eliminate the lateral movement, and that's the key piece that all these attacks share, where they're able to get access to one computer, and that could be somebody clicking on something. It could be you have some vulnerabilities in some software, like your VPN software, where an attacker can leverage that to gain access to your corporate network. But anyway they get in, they're able to very frequently move from one computer to another, and their goal is to get access to a user who has a domain admin account. And from that user, then they have access to your entire corporate environment usually. And that's, when we see the data exfiltration and then the deployment of ransomware. So with the zero trust solution, you're eliminating that lateral movement component. And that makes it also much more difficult for these attackers to discover what assets you have, discover what data you have, and steal that data.
Yeah. Good advice. Good advice.
Thank you.
Brett Stone Gross, Senior Director of Threat Intelligence at Zscaler. Thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation and a walkthrough of the newly released Zscaler Threat Labs 2024 Ransomware Report. To our viewers and listeners, I will share a link to the report in the show notes so that you can dig into this report as well. And Brett, again, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a terrific conversation. I hope you have a great week ahead in Vegas at Black Hat. And I'm sure we'll be talking about ransomware for some time to come.
Thank you, Shelly. It's been a pleasure.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Security Square. I'm your host, Shelly Kramer, Principal Analyst here at Kramer Co. Thanks so much for joining us today. Hit that subscribe button if you've not yet done it, and we'll see you here next time.